Namaste everyone, and a very warm welcome to everyone from Institute of Human Study as well as Samvit Kendra and other associates who have joined this program. 15th August is a popular date for all of us. It's our Independence Day, but it's also known for another reason. It's the birth date of a person who brought fresh and independent zeal and galvanized the entire national and spiritual renaissance of Bharat in the early 20th century. It's Sri Aurobindo. And this year's 15th August, fortunately, it happens to be the starting of the 150th birth centenary of Sri Aurobindo. So this talk today is one of its first in the series of programs that would be there as part of 150th year celebrations of Sri Aurobindo. So we have quite a few dignitaries along with us in this call. Speaker of the day, Shri Francois Gautier ji. Director and Principal of Institute of Human Study, Dr. Chalamai Reddy ji, and President of Samvit Kendra, Dr. Rahul Shastri ji, and other associates of Samvit Kendra and Institute of Human Study. We will formally start this program with a Prarthana Shloka now, and which will be followed by a brief introduction about Samvit Kendra, and then followed by an introduction of Institute of Human Study and our speaker of the day today, his introduction, and then the talk would commence. Towards the end of the talk, we would also have a quick question and answer session where all of us will have an opportunity to interact and share our thoughts and get some of our questions answered as well. So we'll get started with the Prarthana Shloka now by Shri Mahati ji. Before that, a humble request to everyone, please stay muted throughout the program unless we've got an important thing to share. Please use the buttons on the down to raise your hand if you have anything to say instead of unmuting. The Zoom administrator would allow you to speak and we can take it forward. But otherwise, please stay muted throughout the program. We will now start with the Prarthana Shloka by Sri Mahati. Mahati.
Yes. Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Ratnakara Dhautapada Himalaya Kiritini Brahmarajarshi Ratnadhyam Vande Bharatmataram Asato ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you, Mahati ji. A short instruction. We have a registration as well as feedback form as part of this talk. A link would be shared in the chat box shortly. We request everyone who has joined this talk today to please quickly register yourself and provide any feedback towards the end as well. This form would be open till the end of the day today. So it's a short form with your email, mobile, and feedback comments. You can use that to provide your feedback. Now, I request one of our Samvit associates, Srimati Aradhana ji, to give a brief introduction about Samvit Kendra and its activities.
Namaste everyone. As Mahati ji has rightly said, that Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityuma Amrutangamaya. We need to lead ourselves from darkness to light, ignorance to knowledge, death to life. We here at Samvit Kendra have taken this initiative to set the right discourse of our forgotten history and culture. The word Samvit means right knowledge. Samvit Kendra aims at providing a platform for people having a strong inclination towards research and interest in contributing towards the cause of the nation. So Samvit Kendra encourages the youngsters to undertake research in areas of culture, history, and socio-economic studies. Samvit Kendra brings out the monographs, working drafts, and magazines and books. After being in the field of research for a few years, Samvit Kendra has started its own publication called as Samvit Prakashan. So as Ramkrishna ji said, Samvit Kendra has a website called samvitkendra.org, and we have a website for Samvit Prakashan too. The details will be shared soon. Samvit Prakashan is a publication formed to unreveal, nurture, and publish content of forgotten histories of Bharat. Samvit Prakashan invites scholars of eminence, academicians, researchers, and enthusiasts to contribute to the knowledge generation and to contribute through book reviews and to engage in the informed debates, which would shape the public discourse. Few books we have published recently in Samvit Prakashan are Bengal Bleeding, which describes the recent violence in Bengal, the liberation struggle of Hyderabad, history which is not much known to many of us, that Hyderabad got independence after the whole Bharat was independent. And we have few Telugu books also, Rajillu Ramabhumi, which is on Rama Janmabhumi, Henu Rojulu, which is a book which familiarizes us with the incidents that occurred between 1st of August to 15th of August 1947. And also we have a book on Khilafat, which describes the Khilafat movement. Dhanyawad.
Thank you, Aradhana ji, for briefly introducing Samvit Kendra. We now move to the introduction of Institute of Human Study and the person behind it. I'd like to take this privilege to introduce Dr. Chalamai Reddy ji. Dr. Chalamai Reddy ji has been in the field of innovation and education since her career has started. She was a student of Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, Judiciary, in 1977. She later graduated from Ohio University, United States in 1984. And she has her PhD at Sri Aurobindo's Critic of Poetry. She is currently the director and principal of Sri Aurobindo International School as well as Institute of Human Study. So I would like to cordially invite and request Dr. Chalamai Reddy ji to give a brief about, introduce our speaker for the day, Francois Gautier ji, and take the program forward. Thank you.
Namaste to all. Thank you, Ramkrishna, for your kind words of introduction. We are gathered today on this platform to listen to the talk by Francois Gautier, who is an acquaintance and friend of mine since my school days. And I'm very grateful to him that he has consented to give a talk this evening. The occasion is very special. As Ramkrishna already mentioned, it is to commemorate the 150th birth anniversary year of Sri Aurobindo under Celebration Sri Aurobindo programs. And of course, we have the 75 years of Indian independence. So what could be something more, celebrative in its, the purpose of our celebration is something really, I think, very collective for all of us. So this is the first of such talks in a series which will continue for over a few years, and I hope it will still keep continuing. The Institute of Human Study, which is a co-host for this event, it was founded by in 1964 by late Professor Madhusudan Reddy, by the blessings and sanction of the mother. Its main objective has been to disseminate the vision and philosophy of Sri Aurobindo at all levels and in all fields. It has published several books, and we have organized many seminars through the years and many talks. And it runs Sri Aurobindo International School under its aegis, which has been practicing integral education, according to the as envisioned by Sri Aurobindo and the mother, since past 5 decades, since over 5 decades. SAKAR, which stands for Sri Aurobindo Center for Advanced Research at Puducherry, is a research wing which does intensive work in Sri Aurobindo studies. So I'm very happy that Francois Gautier has consented to be the first speaker in this series. And I hope he's going to be continuing to be with us. Francois Gautier, born in Paris, has been the South Asia correspondent for Le Figaro, France's leading newspaper, for over 10 years. He is now the editor-in-chief of the Paris-based La Revue de Land, published by Les Éditions de l'Harmattan. Apart from being a vibrant speaker on India and participating in critical discussions on the Indian contemporary situation, he has authored several books on India in French, which covers topics of India's awakening, Dalai Lama, an encyclopedia of Ayurveda. The titles of his English books are A Western Journalist on India, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, A Guru of Joy, which sold over 1 lakh of copies, and the latest being An Entirely New History of India, published by Garuda Books. So Francois is also building, very interesting to know that Francois, and I would probably love to visit it, he's building a museum of true Indian history in Pune. So as I said, I hope we all are able to visit that very soon. He has been married for over 25 years to Namrita and shuttles between Puducherry, Pune, and Delhi. So with these few words of introduction, Francois, I would like you to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chalamay. Thank you very much. First, I would like to say that I'm not a scholar. I'm a lover of India, and I'm a lover at the feet of India. Whatever I have discovered, whatever I have written, whatever I have done, I have found it in India, and particularly at the feet of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. I was lucky enough to come at a very young age. I drove from Paris to Pondicherry. I was very privileged to meet the mother when I was 19 years old. And of course, this meeting changed my entire life. She was already quite advanced in age, but she looked into my eyes and my world turned upside down. And after that, of course, I felt that India was my home, that I had come home. I lived 7 years in the Sri Aurobindo ashram. This is where I met Chalamay and many other young ashramites who have remained my friends up to today. And I started reading Sri Aurobindo, of course. Before I became a journalist, before I became a journalist, I started reading Sri Aurobindo. And the foundation of the very foundation of my political writing was, of course, Sri Aurobindo, and remains Sri Aurobindo. Now, when I started going out as a journalist, the mother passed away in 1973, November 1973. For many of us, for me particularly, it was an immense shock. When the Guru goes away, they say that the Guru is always present, no doubt, but when the Guru is on earth in a physical body, it is something very special. The notion of the avatar, as explained by Sri Aurobindo, is something absolutely unique. Nobody else in the world has explained it that way, that the divine manifest himself or herself at different times, using different names, using different scriptures, whenever humanity is in peril, whenever humanity needs upliftment. So it's good if you mute everybody, I think, because you have to mute everybody.
Yes, I'm muting.
I can't say I was knowledgeable about India. I had read Aurobindo, I had met the mother, I had the grounding, but nothing replaces having first-hand experience of India. And of course, whatever experience, there was always Aurobindo in the background, in the background of my mind. When I started covering, I'm a political journalist, so today my talk about Aurobindo is mostly going to be political. I hope that you will forgive me for that, because there have been so many talks about Aurobindo's philosophical work, spiritual work, poetic work, that I need not, re-say what has been done and said many times. So my talk is mostly on political Aurobindo. Now, when I started looking at India, particularly when I covered Kashmir, in the early 90s, I covered Kashmir extensively, and I reread Aurobindo. What I saw in Kashmir made me reread Aurobindo. And I discovered that Aurobindo was a revolutionary. Actually, things that he said 100 years ago, 120 years ago, are still relevant today in terms of Kashmir, in terms of education, in terms of politics, in terms of sculpture, of painting. He has written a book called The Foundations of Indian Culture. I think it should be the Bible of every student of India, every Indian student and every Westerner who wants to study and understand India. There is no, as you know, the Foundation of Indian Culture was written because a British journalist, Mr. Archer, wrote in a very disparaging way about India, that there was nothing much of interest and importance in India. He is not the only one. Many others, Westerners, have written this and continue to write this. And Aurobindo wrote a book in response to Mr. Archer, showing that in every field, from arts to politics to social life, India had sought the very foundation of what was and what should be in the future. So today, when we look at the India of today, we need to go back to Aurobindo's vision. Now, I want to start with Aurobindo. I want to do a flashback on Aurobindo's revolutionary work, because a lot of it has been buried underground for good and bad reasons, because the human mind doesn't understand that violence can also be dharmic, that sometimes the Bhagavad Gita says it very clearly. I think Lord Krishna said it very clearly, that when your country is in danger, when your borders are in danger, when your women are in danger, when there's danger of the soul of your country being trampled upon and killed, violence can be dharmic, violence can be, justified. And I think Aurobindo understood that at some point when he came back from England, thoroughly westernized Indian, but of course with the soul of an avatar. He slowly, came to terms to the fact that non-violence and the policies of the Congress of those days. As you know, the Congress was founded by a British man, Mr. Hume. And so the idea of the Congress, and I think it's still true today, the idea of the Congress was, okay, let us get some, freedom of thought and some, little bit of power, but the power remains with the white man, with the British. And Aurobindo thought that, he fought against the moderate Congress so much. And he thought that at some point he understood that violence may be necessary to throw out the British. This was before, he took refuge in Pondicherry and started his work of the supramental. Now, his brother Barin Ghosh, in the house of the father of Aurobindo and Barin, which was then in the suburbs of Calcutta, in northern Calcutta, started making bombs and revolvers and printing pamphlets against the British. There were bombing attempts, some of them that failed, some of them that succeeded but killed the wrong people. I will not go into that. So Sri Aurobindo was a true revolutionary. Today we see in Indian history books and the official history of India that the whole credit for the Indian independence is given to the Congress, to Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, but actually, the early 20th century, Sri Aurobindo and Tilak and a few others, they threw the foundation of the Indian independence. They're the ones who really occultly, in an invisible manner, prepared India for independence. Mr. Nehru and Mr. Gandhi just, finished something which had been prepared, which was ripe. The fruit was ripe to fall. The British had been bled dry by the Second World War. They couldn't afford any more, unruly colonies. Their coffers were empty. I think India had been bled dry also by the British. There have been tremendous famines between 1930 and 1945, where 20 million Indians died because the British needed cotton and tobacco and different things for their industrial revolution and their war effort. So India was bled dry. The British were also bled by the Second World War. So they just left. But the whole credit is given to Mahatma Gandhi and to Nehru. This saddens me. As she said, as Dr. Reddy said, I have written many books on Indian history. I'm not a scholar, but I've studied very closely Indian history. And what I have seen is that Indian history is not written as it happened. Not only about Sri Aurobindo, who's got a minor place in the role of Indian independence, but about everything from Alexander the Great to Kashmir, from Aurangzeb to Ashoka, from the Vijayanagar Empire to Tibet. Everything has been distorted, first by the British and then by after independence, and fortunately by Marxist historian endorsed by the first Prime Minister of India, Mr. Nehru. Now, if you read Sri Aurobindo, not only the foundation of Indian culture, but particularly his conversations, his evening conversations, he had in music conversations that were recorded by Mr. Purani. And there, maybe because Sri Aurobindo thought that they would not be published, he gave freely, he spoke very freely about, for instance, about violence. During the Second World War, the British were the enemies of India, but Sri Aurobindo said from the beginning that Hitler was a Nazi and he had to be fought again with violence. Again, we come back to violence. And there are even quotes from Sri Aurobindo which are shocking to the non-Aurobindian. I remember particularly there were traitors to the country in the Second World War. I think in Norway, there was a gentleman called Quisling, who was a dictator and who welcomed the Nazis. And Sri Aurobindo said in one of these Indian conversations, he said, this man should be shot. Now, how can a guru, how can a yogi, how can an avatar say this man should be shot? Again, we need to go back to the Bhagavad Gita. We need to go back to Lord Krishna to understand that violence sometimes is necessary. Sri Aurobindo was a Kshatriya. I mean, his philosophy, his poetry, his yoginess are never in question. But what is often forgotten that Sri Aurobindo was a Kshatriya. Whether he was a Kshatriya fighting the British and allowing his brother to make bombs and revolvers in the basement of his father's house in Calcutta, or whether he fought the Asuras occultly when he started his descent into the unconscious and the subconscious when he was doing his yoga in Pondicherry, he was a tremendous warrior. He was a tremendous warrior, and this is a quality that he kept saying. Indians need to go back to this Kshatriya spirit, the Buddhism, and he spoke a lot, of course, directly, indirectly, in veiled manner, or more unveiled manner against the Mahatma Gandhi. There are numerous quotes of Sri Aurobindo and the mother where they either make fun of the Mahatma Gandhi or say that what the Mahatma Gandhi was doing at certain times, like the Mopla rebellion, was harmful to India. Now, Sri Aurobindo had a clear vision about independent India. He had fought for independent India. He had fought so hard, both in a physical manner, by his writings. As you know, he wrote many articles in different newspapers in English, in Marathi, in Hindi, in Bengali, and he was imprisoned for that. Once for 1 year in Alipur jail because he was suspected of being part of the bomb making and revolver making in Calcutta. And another time he was again to be arrested and he fled to Chananagar and then Pondicherry. He spoke extensively about what independent India should be, both officially in his writings and officially in his evening conversation with different disciples. He had a very clear vision, and he himself had shown the way that he was an Indian who was sent to the West, who assimilated the best of the West, but when he came back to India, understood the sacredness, the ancientness, the holiness of so many things that were Indian. The past, the glorious past of India, Sri Aurobindo never rejected. On the contrary, he said we need to assimilate the best of Western culture, but retain our roots in the past. And fortunately, in 1947, Mr. Nehru turned, his back to the past. Again, I don't want to accuse Mr. Nehru that was for good and bad reasons. He thought that socialism, and making dams and closing down, religious institutions and, exposing the Marxist policies, which in those days were still in fashion, would make India a great country. But when we look at India today, in different fields, in politics, for instance, let's start with politics. Now, India, we say that India is the greatest democracy in the world. It's true, but at the same time, it has been hijacked. It has been hijacked. We see that in India, and Sri Aurobindo must have seen it, between 1947 and 1950, he saw physically and intuitively the direction that India was taking. And I think the mother once said, when she looked at the photo taken by the French photographer, the famous French photographer Cartier-Bresson, that there is a lot of suffering in Sri Aurobindo's face. I think in the last years of his life, though he was in the supramental, though he was beyond suffering, he was beyond negativity, he still must have suffered, like the Christ suffered when he was crucified, to see the direction that India was taking. Because he must have seen 30, 40 years in advance of what was going to happen in terms of politics, in terms of education, in terms of the judiciary. It's a catastrophe. I don't want to be negative, but the direction that Mr. Nehru and successive Indian governments gave to India is difficult to correct today. In terms of democracy now, in terms of politics, we see that the VVIP system suited the British, because the British were a handful of people. They were in Calcutta, then in Delhi. There were not that many, but they had an absolute might. They ruled over, I don't know, in those days, 450 million people, a handful of Britishers. And today we see that it's a handful of people. I spend a lot of time in Delhi. I keep shuttling to Delhi because everything happens in Delhi. Today, in 2021, we are well advanced in the 21st century. Everything happens in Delhi. And there is one person who mostly sees everything, decides everything. This is the Congress legacy, that this VVIP system whereby if you're a MP or MLA, let's say an MP elected from Tamil Nadu, which is so far from Delhi, you might be elected with goodwill, aspiration to do something for your people, and then you go to Delhi and you're given palatial bungalow in New Delhi and so many servants and so many secretaries, and you sit in that parliament which has no light, no air, and which is like a fish market. I spent a lot of time in the Indian Parliament. It's like a fish market. In a fish market in Pondicherry, business is conducted. They're shouting and screaming, but business is conducted. Ultimately, the fish is sold. The Indian Parliament is like a fish market. It's a shame. It's a shame. Sri Aurobindo must have seen that. It's a shame of democracy. The greatest democracy in the world is a shameful democracy. And I meet these ministers today. I'm not going back from Sri Aurobindo. I'm still on Sri Aurobindo. I meet these ministers today, and they're good people that I have known when they were in the RSF. They were simple people, and they're sitting in these palatial offices surrounded by an army of secretaries and PAs and PAs and peons and and guards and security, because they have no contact anymore with the people. They have lost contact with the people. And at some point, either they resign and they go back to their roots, or they lose the thread. They lose the thread of that they were elected by the people, for the people, and their job is to work for the people. And it's impossible in Delhi. It's impossible. Aurobindo must have seen that politics was taking a totally wrong turn. It needs a revolution. I'm a radical journalist. I'm a radical Aurobindo, if you want. To change politics in India, you need a revolution. I mean, even at the grassroots, Aurobindo praised so much the panchayat system. He spoke so much in his books about the village, the village system which looked after itself, economically through barter, judicially because it had its own judge, its own panchayat, politically because even if you're a low caste, you had your voice, this has been crushed. It is gone. I mean, I see it in Tamil Nadu. The panchayat have been taken over by the DMK and the ADMK. There's no more panchayat. There's no more autonomy. So the autonomy was stripped from the people and taken to Delhi, which is a very far away place. Every time I travel from Pondicherry to Delhi, it's like going from Paris to Greece. Different language, different people, different climate, different customs, different foods. So you find that it needs a revolution. Mao Zedong, whatever his faults, he killed 3-4 millions of his own people. He was an absolute dictator, but he had understood that you need a revolution to change things. He sent all his ministers and his MPs, send them back to the countryside, go and work in the fields. Unless the capital of Delhi is shifted back to almost central India, which will break the backbone of the huge bureaucracy that Mr. Nehru created. There is a huge bureaucracy in India. The Prime Minister of India was a very good man, who was full of good ideas. His hands are bound because the bureaucracy of India are the real rulers. And Aurobindo must have seen that also between 1947 and 1950, that there was a British bureaucracy that ruled India. And it ruled India for the British masters. But now there's a huge bloated bureaucracy which got its own power. It's a revolving power. And they're not going to give it up like that. They're not. So unless there's a revolution, Delhi is the capital of babus, of high bureaucrats who speak good English, smoke the pipe, read Shakespeare, of diplomats, who have no idea about the real India, about that rural India that so many of us know and love, of the common Indian people who have in their genes this tolerance, this acceptation of the diversity of the divine. When I started as a journalist and I went away from the Pondicherry ashram where I spent 7 years, and from Aurobindo where I spent another 3-4 years, I discovered that the Indian people, they live Aurobindo more than the people in Delhi. I started my political career, my journalist career as a photographer, and I did a feature in Kerala on Kalaripayat, which is a very ancient martial art, which went to China with Buddhism, also Japan with Buddhism, blended with some local martial art and became Kung Fu and Karate and so many other things. So I saw these masters, Kalaripayat masters in those days. I'm talking about the 80s, early 80s, mid 80s, Karate masters, which were village people, and they had this knowledge in them that Aurobindo spoke about, this understanding of the divine, understanding of the avatar, what is karma, who am I, what happens when I die, why I need to do dharma. So these people have it, and I think there are still many people who have it in the rural India, in their genes naturally, but in Delhi it is gone. Now, let's come to education. This is one area where Aurobindo was very strong about. He was very strong about the need of education, and when he passed away, the mother took it up, and in the ashram school and later in Aurobindo, she tried to put into practice what Aurobindo had said about education, that life is an unending education, that nothing can be taught, it is there in the children, it needs to be woken up in the children through different methods. She put it in practice. Now, if you look at education today in India, you are just making, the biggest brain drain in the world, because you're not teaching anything Indian. Forget about teaching Aurobindo, because Aurobindo is not taught, in universities. Aurobindo is not taught in philosophical curriculums where he should be the first person to be taught, because his philosophy was, on the level of Nietzsche and higher, because he had the supramental. So not only should we not taught, but nothing Indian is taught in Indian schools, universities. Only, the Western, it's a Western education. It's a total Western education. So people like Shivaji Maharaj, or even okay, Rani of Jhansi is an exception, though that's another matter, but people like Ahilyabai or Tarabai, or these people are not taught. Shivaji Maharaj was the Napoleon of India. I mean, in France we have Napoleon, and Aurobindo indeed spoke about Napoleon. He said Napoleon was the first one who thought about united Europe, and he was a vibhuti. So Shivaji Maharaj is on par with Napoleon, even more. I mean, I have studied Shivaji Maharaj. I'm making a museum in Pune dedicated to Shivaji Maharaj. He was a truly secular man. He was a nationalist Hindu, no doubt. He fought the Mughals that he felt was invaders, were not Indian. They were, indeed, in those days, they were invaders, they were foreigners. He fought them ruthlessly, brilliantly, with this tiny army. He's a genius. This man was a genius, but he was also very secular. He would never harm any Muslim women or girls. He scolded his son because he had taken prisoners some Muslim women. He built the first Indian Navy in the history of India. He was a genius, but he's not there. Kalidasa, whom Aurobindo praised so much, Aurobindo spoke so much about Kalidasa from his early days, from his Baroda days. He started, studying Sanskrit and reading Kalidasa, and he said Kalidasa is, higher than Shakespeare. He's the highest poet ever. Is Kalidasa taught in Indian schools today, universities? Forget it. I'm a Westerner. I don't talk Sanskrit. I just have to open a little bit of translation in English of Kalidasa, and I can see the genius, the level, the poetry. But Kalidasa is not taught. I mean, everything is like that. Maharana Pratap was the only Rajput who fought the Mughals. Again, he fought Akbar, the better Mughal emperor. He fought him because he also felt that he was a foreigner. He's not taught. He's ignored in the South. Nobody knows about Maharana Pratap. When I did my exhibition on Shivaji Maharaj, my first exhibition, I printed it in Pondicherry, in Aurobindo actually. And the man who printed it was a very nice man, friend of mine, Tamil Hindu. He thought it was about the actor, the Tamil actor, Shivaji. No clue who Shivaji Maharaj. In France, Napoleon, every year there are books and films and controversies, and theses on him. Shivaji Maharaj is forgotten. So the education that is today given in India, and I'm sorry to say, after 7 years of the BJP, nothing has changed. The education, maybe on the fringe, a little bit has been done, but the education is a totally Western education. As a result, Indian children are brilliant, no doubt. They have a great memory. They keep some Hinduness in them, and one of these characteristics is to have a great, capacity to multitask. Hindus have a capacity to multitask, so they have a fantastic memory. They top universities, but they're just good for export. They have no roots, no pride to be Indian. Okay, I meet so many Indians in the US, in UK, in France a little bit. They have no pride to be Indians. You all are exceptions, but there are 241 of you. You are exceptions. The majority of students that you meet in the US, I once gave a lecture in Atlanta University. It's a huge university. There were like 3,000 Indian students there. And I gave a lecture on rewriting in industry. 11 turned up, 11 turned up out of 3,000. It shows the lack of Indianness that exists in people. Aurobindo must have seen that in 1947, 1948, 1949, 1950. It must have broken his heart. It must have broken his heart that India was adopting everything British and clamping it down on a nation that has such an ancient history, that has such a unique psyche. The psyche of Indian is so unique. Me, a Westerner, a Frenchman, I came to India and I felt the first day I landed in India, I drove from Paris to Delhi actually. We spent the first night, we had 5 cars, we had a caravan of 5 cars driving from Paris, and we arrived in Delhi and spent the first night in the Aurobindo ashram. Now it's called the Mother School in Delhi. It's a huge compound. There was a very small house, beautiful house, still in the field. And I spent the first night there. And the first night I felt, maybe Aurobindo's force and the Mother force. I felt that in this earth, in this soil, which I was, for the first time I was setting foot upon, there was a knowledge. The Mother India is not, it's not only a term. And Aurobindo again spoke so much about Mother India, Bharat Mata, India is feminine, India is the mother, and I felt it my first night that from that earth, there was a knowledge, there was a very ancient knowledge for which I was looking for these answers for a long time. As a youngster in France, educated in some of the best boarding schools in Europe, my parents sent me to the best boarding schools, and I was looking for answers, and I couldn't even formulate the questions. But when I came to India, not only the questions were, but the answers were there. And I felt there was an infinite knowledge in this country, and I felt it in different places since I came here. I felt it in Srinagar, of all places. One night I was in Srinagar. That Aurobindo went to Kashmir, and he also spoke a lot about Kashmir. He said, I think in maybe 1941 in one of his talks, he said, in 1900 there were 1 million Hindus in Kashmir. If it continues like that, there'll be none left. He said that, the ethnic cleansing of Hindus happened in the 90s, in the mid 90s. I was there, I witnessed it, So he said that long 50 years before that there'll be no Hindu left. Anyway, so I was in Srinagar. Srinagar was under curfew as usual. It was night. I was walking. There was only one hotel which was open in those days. It was called Hadoo's Hotel. It was on the bank of the Jhelum River. There is a big earth bank so that the Jhelum doesn't come into Srinagar. So I was walking there, not too far from the hotel, hearing gunfire and grenades in those nights. There were a lot of gunfire and grenades fighting, and I felt again, that Kashmir is India needs to keep Kashmir, not only because strategically it's very important from a strategic point of view, but because that knowledge is there. Millions of sadhus, gurus, of avatars, Swami Vivekananda, they went to Kashmir, they meditated, they left something in the soil of Kashmir, and I could feel it that day. It may sound subjective now, but on the spot, I really felt it that Kashmir is worth keeping because it's a holy earth. There is something in that earth, all this meditating and tapasaya of all these millions of, ordinary sadhus and sannyasins and yogis, it has impregnated the earth. So, education. I see today, and I know a lot of ministers because I defended the BJP. I always felt that the BJP government, the BJP people, in those days, it was Mr. Advani and Mr. Murli Manohar Joshi, they were my friends. I'm talking about, before Ayodhya, before the Babri Masjid raising. I knew them, they were my friends, I'm still in touch with them today. And I felt the BJP was the better party to come in power because the Congress was just espousing everything that was Western and British. The input that Mr. Hume, the founder of the Congress, put, it's still, you can see today still that this attraction for the white, I'm a white man, I shouldn't say that, but Sonia Gandhi, whatever her qualities, because I believe she has qualities too, symbolizes this fatal attraction to the white people that the Congress has, and has never lost. So Aurobindo spoke so much, about education, the need of education, and the BJP whom I wish to come to power and which came to power. And of course, it's a tremendous chance, for the better for us who are lovers of this ancient spirituality, who are defenders of Aurobindo. It is a million times better than the Congress, no doubt, but still, they're in shackles, they're in shackles because not only what I said about Delhi, being so far from India, surrounded by the entire VVIP system, Mr. Modi must be the most protected man in the world. So, and COVID added on, unfortunately, COVID, I will talk 5 minutes about the hour of God, at the end of my talk. But COVID added to the isolation of Delhi and of Mr. Modi, cutting them more from their roots, from the people who elected them. So not only the BJP is shackled because of this VIP system, but also because if they do anything, there'll be a revolution. You know, when Mr. Murli Manajoshi tried to introduce the singing of Vande Mataram, I'm talking about, you know, I don't know which year it was, maybe 2010, 2011, I forgot. There was such an outcry, but the more time passes, the more minorities in India become, unfortunately, more radical, you know, more radical. So anything the BJP is going to do to reform education is to provoke such a huge outcry that the minister, the education minister, I met four of them. I met Smriti Irani, you know, who was a very, you know, dynamic woman, a bit authoritarian, but dynamic, you know. Then I met Mr. Javadekar, who was a very good man, you know, I knew Aurobindo. And then I met the last one, Mr. Pokriya, also a good man, you know, maybe less efficient than the others. And I met recently Mr. Pradhan, who seemed like a, you know, sincere man and also a devotee of Aurobindo. They cannot do anything because, you know, if you put, for instance, Hatha Yoga, you know, Hatha Yoga comes from India. It is flooded the world. You know, Hatha Yoga today, every Hollywood star practices Hatha Yoga. You know, in America, you know, out of 5%, 3 or 4 practice Hatha Yoga. It's taken the world by storm. You know, they come from India, come from the Hindu. Now, if you introduce Hatha Yoga in schools, minorities will scream, oh, Hindus, you know, saffronization of school, you know. Yet Hatha Yoga is a universal tool. If you take pranayama, you know, Aurobindo practiced pranayama intensively for many years, and he said that it allowed him to write freely, you know, it gave him so much power. Now, pranayama is a very secular thing. You know, breath belongs to everybody, you know. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, one of the contemporary gurus, I said, you know, there is no religion in breath. You know, if you're a Muslim or Christian or Hindu, you're breathing the same air. So if you practice pranayama, and pranayama is very powerful. I practice it myself, you know, another journalist covering many places of danger and of strife, you know, like Sri Lanka in the times of LTT, or Kashmir in the times of the ethnic cleansing of the Hindus, or Afghanistan, or whatever, you know. Practicing pranayama gives you, you know, a little bit of calmness, you know, intuition. If the BJP introduced pranayama in schools, and I think it should, you know, there are pranayama exercises for children which are wonderful, you know, in a playful manner. You teach children, you know, like the breath of the lion or the elephant, you know, that breathe up and down, or the staircase, you know, you breathe up and you breathe down. Very, very simple, you know, playful pranayama exercise for children. There'll be an outcry. So the spiritualization of education, of which Aurobindo spoke so much, will it ever happen? Again, you need a revolution. Again, you need a revolution because the BJP is doing it at very homeopathic dose, and homeopathic dose is not going to work. It's not going to work, you know, because up to now, up to today, up to the moment I speak, the Indian student that comes out of MIT or any university, forget about JNU, even university like Ashoka University, which is supposed to be a more BJP introduced university, just, you know, good for export, you know, they're just good for export because they have no root in their culture. Again, we need a revolution. Now, judiciary. Now, the judiciary, again, Aurobindo spoke a lot about in the Foundation of Indian Culture about the need, you know, to retain the judiciary at the grassroots level, and then it can rise up to the Supreme Court. You know, it's an upward triangle. You know, from the base up. You know, but in Delhi it's the contrary. You know, it's from the top, you know, down. It can't be like this. It has to be from the base up to the top. So judiciary in India is just a bad copy of the West. Again, you know, like democracy, you know, which has been hijacked in India by the politicians. It's a bad copy of the West. You know, anybody can do a court case. A court case will last 20, 30 years. So people know that they can get away with anything because there are not enough courts, there are not enough judges. The mind of the judges, you can see the mind of the Supreme Court judges is totally westernized also. secular, in the wrong sense, in the bad sense, westernized, secular in the sense that it is westernized. So judiciary is bogged down in India. It's a catastrophe. So we need a revolution. Now, of course, there is supramental. In my days, when I was a student in the ashram, we used to talk the youngsters about the supramental. The mother was there and the supramental was very near. We thought that maybe not we would be supramentalized, but definitely the mother was supramentalized and the immortality was at our door. Now, we need the supramental, we need the divine grace, we need the hour of God. And this is how I would like to finish my talk. Give me 5 minutes to talk about the hour of God. Now, the hour of God is a very powerful, it's a mantric, all of you must have read it. It's a mantric reading, if you read, I have read it 100 times, I have it here with me. You can read it 100 times, it is so powerful. So what does Aurobindo say in the hour of God? He said that basically there are moments when the breath of the Lord is upon our waters. And in these moments, even a little effort produces great results. I think at the moment we are in one of these hour of Gods. I believe that even the COVID is a manifestation of that hour of God. The COVID, of course, is bringing tremendous hardship, suffering, economic suffering for so many people. I see it in France, I see it in India. Dying, of course, but the dying is nothing compared to people who die of cancer or heart attacks or road accidents. It's minuscule compared to that, but okay. But the COVID is an instrument for change. So I believe the COVID is part of the hour of God. I believe that, of course, the advent of Mr. Modi, he's the best Prime Minister of India. This is not a political talk in the sense of preaching for one party or the other, but from a rational point of view, from a working point of view, Mr. Modi is the most hardworking Prime Minister that India has seen, and he's the one who looks to be the most selfless. He works for India, not for himself or his party. We have seen in the history of India that most politicians either work for themselves, or for their families, to make money for 2-3 generations, or at the best for their party, to put money, black and white, in the coffers of their party for the next election. Because in India, you need to have an eye on the next election. This is also an hijacking of democracy. Every month there's a different election here and there. So instead of governing India, you spend your time thinking about winning elections, which is, in my opinion, a great waste of time. So I believe in the moment there is an hour of God, that COVID is part of the hour of God, that the advent of Mr. Modi and the BJP in Delhi is part of the hour of God, and that it is a moment, as Aurobindo said, that where India can make so much progress. Now, one of the vision of Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda and so many others is that India will become the spiritual leader of the world. Now, it's already happened in a way. When Swami Vivekananda went to Chicago, and did his speech in the Parliament of Religions, he brought yoga to the West. And indeed, since then, Hatha Yoga, as I said, has spread all over the West. Now, there have been medical studies that meditation is extremely good for the body, for everything, for the heart, for the lungs, for the blood circulation, for the brain, everything. Pranayama also, there are many medical studies on pranayama. Ayurveda now, this very ancient knowledge, medical knowledge, the most ancient medical system still in practice in the world, is coming to the West. I've written a book on Ayurveda in French, and it's doing fairly well in France. So it has started. But for India to become the spiritual leader of the West, first India needs to become a powerful nation. And for that, we come back to Aurobindo Kshatriya spirit. India has lost the spirit of Kshatriya. We see it with China. China is India's enemy. I know that. I'm a political journalist. The army knows that because it is their duty to defend India. But many people don't, the Indian politicians don't seem to know that. That at every turn, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Nepal, whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it is Kashmir, China considers India as its natural enemy, as its natural competitor, both economic, political, military, territory-wise, and nuclear-wise, of course. But we see that in India, in this hour of God, when one needs to be bold, whether it is education, the revolution that we need in education, whether it is the revolution that we need in reforming Indian politics so that we have a true politics that, mirrors the will of the people of India. And there is the will of people of India. We see today in the social media, because the mainstream media doesn't reflect the will of people. It reflects the wills of the leaders, of the politically correct. But in social media, we see, today in Twitter or in Facebook, that there is a will among the Indian people. There is a will that, Aurobindo needs to come back on the fore. There's a will that, we need to go back to our roots. There's a will that we should not surrender everything that the Indian to is part of it. Well, it is there in the social media. So that revolution that we need in this hour of God needs to happen. And for that, and this is the second part of Aurobindo's talk, he says, but woe to those who are ready and misuse the hour of God. I'm paraphrasing, but woe, great harm will happen to those who are ready, who are strong and ready. And I believe India is strong and ready. India is the only country in the world which still has that knowledge, which used to be all over the world. In Greece, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, they knew what happens when you die, who is God, how God is reborn, different time, different names, what is karma, what is it was known all over the world. In Greece, in Rome, there was knowledge, there was that knowledge. Now, India is the only country which possesses that knowledge. All the other countries think that either you live one life, and then you go either to heaven or to hell or to paradise, depending, of your deed in life. Or if you blow yourself up like this guy did in the Kabul airport, you will go to heaven and enjoy 100 visions. These are very simplistic, notions of life. But in India, what I felt the first time I landed in India, that knowledge is there. What happens when I die? Why am I reborn? What is the divine spark in me? What should we call the psychic? It is there. So in this hour of God, where India has the chance to become a superpower, it should not be misused, both at the political level in Delhi by those who have been empowered by the people of India and the Indian people, because Mr. Modi has started great things, the cleansing of India, which is so necessary, the cleansing of corruption, which is so necessary. Corruption is still so ingrained in Indian people because they had to cheat so much, and there's so many colonizer that it's got into the genes. They don't, they're not like the Christian. They don't see it bad or like a sin. If you cheat, and you cheat a little bit here, cheat there, or cheat in crores of rupees with black money, so it's still an evil in India. The bureaucracy. So we are at this moment in the hour of God. COVID is part of the hour of God. The advent of Mr. Modi is part of the hour of God. The hour of God is upon every Indian here, but Indians as a whole have to wake up. They have to feel the hour of God. Everyone has to contribute. We see today, especially amongst Hindus, that it's first my family, first my children. Let me send them to Harvard or to Oxford or to some other university so that they do well and they marry and they have children and the children do well. This is selfishness. This is not the spirit of Kshatriya. Spirit of Kshatriya is how can I make my country great? And what Kennedy said, what can I do for my country? Not what my country can do for me. What can I do for my country? I, as a Frenchman, feel that, it is my duty to defend this great country, this great knowledge. It is my duty to say that Aurobindo was an avatar, that his vision has been trampled upon and misused and ignored, and that it is a case of monumental catastrophe. So we are in the hour of God, and we all need to rise to that hour of God. Namaste.
Thank you, Sri Francois ji. That was an invigorating talk to everyone. So now we will have the floor open for a few questions for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Everyone will stay muted. I request anyone who have questions to use the raise hand button to ask the question, and the administrator can allow you to ask the question and we can take it forward.
They can put it on the chat also, then I'll see them.
Yes, please use the chat box as well to post your questions.
Yeah, I see there's something about the Displanting Global Hindutva Conference. Can I say something about that?
Yes, please.
That's the last.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, this, one of the perversions of shall I say something about this monthly Global Hindutva Conference?
Kindly go ahead, Francois ji.
Yeah, so this is a conference that's happening in the US on the 12th of September, I think, and that has been sponsored or recommended by 45 universities, and some of them among the most prestigious in the US. It is very unfortunate, and this is one of the things that Shlomo must have seen, is that the study of India, which is called Indology, Indology is in the West, the study of India. There are people, scholars in my country, in France, there are scholars who are paid by the French government to study and inform French people about India. Now, these scholars, and one of them is one of the speakers in that conference. His name is Christophe Jaffrelot. Have been haters of India's spirituality, Hindus, Hindu religion, the BJP, Mr. Modi, intense haters, but in a very academic and scientific manner. Now, Mr. Jaffrelot is the brain behind this Hindutva, dismantling Hindutva conference, because he has written many books on Hindutva, and he has advocated the fact that Hindutva is a very dangerous thing, more dangerous than the Taliban. It is fortunate for us that this conference must have been planned before the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and we have seen it's been a catastrophe at every level. So this conference comes at the wrong time for them, and they're exposing themselves, because nobody can say, even if they're most anti-Hindu, anti-Modi, anti-BJP, nobody can, say with a right mind that Hindutva is as dangerous as the Taliban, though the comparison has been made many times. So one of the reforms that needs to be done, and I'm working on it actually, I've been working with the past education minister, and I also met Mr. Pradhan, is to reform Western Indology. We need Western Indology that are more friendly, more grounded in reality, and that conference like that, which have very bad publicity for India, because Westerners are ignorant. Americans are very ignorant about India, and they're not enlightened by Hindus who live there. They're very ignorant. So you tell them Hindutva is as dangerous as the Taliban, they might well believe it. So we need to fight this, and those of you who listen to that, to my talk who are in the US, have to do something about it.
We have a question in the chat box from Sri Alok Kumar ji. I will read out for you. The Kshatriya spirit is not flowing out naturally from Bharatiyas. What would you suggest to the educators so that the backbone of the youth becomes strong through education?
You see, courage, ultimately, we all need to face adversity, and whether it is moral adversity or physical adversity, we need to have courage. Now, the spirit of Kshatriya, as I said in my talk, has been blunted in India by two forces. One is the perversion of Buddhism. I don't believe Buddha preached an absolute ahimsa in the face of terror, or in the face of invaders. But his followers have perverted in message, and it's been divided. Buddhism has been divided in so many schools. So the spirit of absolute ahimsa has perverted the Kshatriya spirit of India, and also Gandhism, of course. Gandhi, as you know, during the Second World War, when Aurobindo said Hitler is an asura, he needs to be fought physically and with violence and with force, Gandhi said, no, he told the Jews, you let yourself be killed. He told the Ethiopians, let the Italians trample you, do not resist. And this has blunted the spirit of Indian today, even of the BJP. I see, among the BJP that people mistake, non-violence for goodness, but it is not goodness. If you have to be non-violent, you need to be strong. If you're weak, and you're non-violent, people will trample upon you. As China is, China pretends to negotiate. It invades India first. It, encroaches upon India. Then it pretends to negotiate, retreats a little bit, but doesn't retreat fully, and encroaches somewhere else. And every time India is taken, every time India is full. So the spirit of Kshatriyism has to come back to India when individually you are facing things with courage. And that means, I've given talks in the US RSS, there they call HSS, people who ask me, what can I do in the US to counter, hostile journalists, hostile media, wrongful, deceitful, slandering information on India, which is happening all the time in the US with CNN, with the New York Times, etc. So I said, you go and meet the journalist, 3, 4 of you, you go and meet the journalist, you confront him physically, you don't have to be violent. You confront him, the journalist, physically. This is called courage. This is called spirit of satire. And you say, what you've written is wrong. And you can say it forcefully. There are so many weapons that you could have to counter the negative thing that are done by the enemy. But for that, you need courage. You need to go out of your comfort zone and confront the enemy. And sometimes you need maybe to confront him physically. Or you need to slander your enemy. You need to compromise him. Your enemy is the enemy. There is no goodness. If he's the enemy, and India has so many enemies at the moment, Christian missionaries were converting huge numbers in the south. Marxists who are denying the ancientness and Aurobindo and the sacredness of India. The Islam, which is growing at such a fast pace, every day there's a new mosque springing up all over India. The westernization of India, this needs to be confronted physically. Not, I'm okay, you can write to the editors, you can, but coming out of your comfort zone means you go and do something in the streets. If you say anything about halal, even if it's indirectly, Muslims come down the streets. Muslims are united much more than Hindus. They will come down the streets, they'll go to extremes, of course. They will kill people, they will behead people. You don't have to go to the extreme, but you need to come down the streets. That is called Kshatriya spirit.
Thank you. We have another question from Sri Harshanandaji in the chat box. We have a lot of questions. We don't know how many we can take. Maybe another 2 due to paucity of time. I'll read out the question. How can the dream of Sri Aurobindo of United India pre-partition be realized again with so many anti-Hindu forces acting not only in Pakistan, Bangladesh, but also in Bharat?
Okay, Aurobindo is a force. He's a force in motion. I think that what we feel or what we don't feel, he said that the supramental is inevitable, in spite of man. And the mother said it also in her own word that, in spite of man, in spite of the human frailties, the supramental will happen. Now, so there is a force. So you have to call that force. I mean, whenever I do something, whenever I need protection, then I just close my eyes and I call on that force. So if enough people do that, I think it will be a great force. It'll be realized again that the task of Aurobindo, which was, I think Aurobindo was in love with India. He had a weakness for India, and he said somewhere that the divine has a weakness for India. India is a dear child of the divine, and I think it's still true today. India is still a dear child of the divine. There are so many gurus, so many great souls incarnated in India at the moment, who have India at heart, who have the ancient knowledge at heart, who try in their own ways to propagate that knowledge. So India is still a dear child of divine. Now, if you're aware of that, and if you call down Aurobindo's force individually or in a group, we need to unite. The greatest weakness of India is that people are very disunited. Hindus particularly are very disunited. We see that Muslims are united. When I traveled from Paris to Delhi, my best friend was a Muslim French Moroccan, and in every Muslim country we crossed, he would say Allahu Akbar, and people open their doors, give us food, give us shelter, give us the hookah, so there's a unity of Muslims, of Islam, which is lacking so much amongst Hindus. If you say Om Namah Shiva in New York to Hindu, you think that you're a madman. So, but if you say Allahu Akbar to another Muslim, you think, wow, great, my brother is here, I have a brother. So the sense of brotherhood, of sisterhood is lost amongst Hindus. Unless you regain that, then you'll have Sonia Gandhi, you'll have Mother Teresa who will come and do your work, because it is the work of Hindus for their brothers and sisters to look after their more deprived one, and it is not happening. So the spirit of Aurobindo, you invoke it in you, you unite, you bring friends around you, you make small groups like this one, and it'll happen.
Yeah. I think we will have one last question. We'll be sorry to many others who have asked the questions, and some of them have raised their hands as well. Due to paucity of time, we'll take one last question on a different theme by Sri Sudhakar Sutarji. In current times, most of us, especially the younger ones, demand freedom. But without discipline, freedom becomes license to chaos. How to overcome on this?
But India, it depends where you live. India is a land of great freedom. Whatever the Western journalists say and the ideologists, me as a Westerner, as a white man, I'm a born Catholic educated. I have found the greatest freedom in India to express myself. I have traveled in every corner of India, every corner. From Kanyakumari to Kashmir to, I even went to the Tibetan border, in Arunachal Pradesh to Taiwan, everywhere I have never been aggressed, I've never been, my passport has never been asked in the street, I've never been mugged. So India is a land of great freedom. So don't ask for freedom, you have it. The shackles you have are your own shackles of your own making. The greatest freedom you have in India. You need to propagate your Indianness. You see, that's the thing that I find lacking in India abroad. If you're abroad, you need to propagate Indianness. Okay, you integrate in the country which you have adopted, which has adopted you, whether it's the US or UK or Canada. You have gratitude for that country, but you shine some Indianness, something about your ancientness of the country, something about the knowledge of your country. You shine it in different ways. And you fight for your country. You feel, I am proud to be Indian. You see, the shackles is that Indians, the youth of India is not proud to be Indian. I'm a Frenchman, brought up in French, French poets, French, warriors, French, everything. So I grew up to be a proud Frenchman. Even today, the youngsters in France, they're proud to be French. But in India, you're never proud to be Indian. So unless Mr. Modi can't do it for you unless you start being proud to be Indian and you defend your Indianness. You spread it, not only you spread it, but you defend it when it is attacked. As a Kshatriya, if you do that, great things will happen. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Sri Francois ji. It's 8:15 and we would take a pause here. A few information for all the participants here. As you can see, there are quite a few links being posted in the chat box about few of the questions that have come, and some of them are not answered, and we have copied all the questions, and we will try to make an attempt to see if some of these can be answered offline to the participants. At this juncture, we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Sri Francois Gautier ji on enlightening us with this great speech today. We would also like to thank Samvit Kendra and Institute of Human Study for hosting this program. And we would like to also thank all the participants who have been a great support in this talk today. Thank you, everyone. A small reminder about the registration and feedback form, which is pasted in the chat box now. Please use this and do register your names. You will get further information about further programs and other aspects through this registration form. And we would now formally conclude the program with a Shanti Mantra. I request Sri Raghudeja ji to recite the Shanti Mantra and conclude the program.
Hari Om. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kashit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.